All right. Well, again, good evening, everybody. As I just said, my name's Joel. Hi guys. All right. So this I want to start tonight. I'm gonna ask you a question, and I want you guys to talk amongst yourselves for 30 seconds. Now, last time I did this, I lost the room for like 5 minutes because everybody was talking on top of each other. But you guys are better behaved and better looking than the DIY I did 2 weeks ago. All right? All right, okay. So that's not gonna happen tonight, all right? So this is a question, and find somebody next to you and then give the answer. This is a question that I want you guys to answer. If you had a time machine, okay? If you had a time machine and you could go anywhere on time, at any, time period, do whatever, where would you go and what would you do? Find somebody next to you and talk. Go. 10 seconds. And time's up. All right. Awesome. See, you actually did better than the other time. Like, I was like, guys, it was like 2 minutes to get everybody to calm down. I like you people. You're awesome. All right. So, I've always thought this was a fascinating question. Partially because one of my favorite movies of all time is Back to the Future. Anybody watch? There you go. There we go. Okay? I mean, come on. Like, Marty McFly, like, he plays guitar, he has that, like, sweet vest, and, like, the DeLorean, like, flies in the second movie. It's, like, the perfect time travel movie. And I remember growing up watching the movie and asking myself, well, if I had a time machine, what would I do? And I wish I was, like, the spiritual one that's like, I would like to go and be with Jesus, and, like, see where Jesus walked and whatever. But the reality of it is that most of the time, when I fantasize about having a time machine, my first thought was, I wish I could go back like 2 weeks ago and give myself the answer to the pop quiz I got that I didn't study for, right? Or like, I wish I had a time machine, I could go back to like, middle school and talk myself out of asking that girl out that was gonna say no and like crush my heart into a million pieces and, kind of like stop myself from doing that. And I always had that fantasy, like, what would I do if I could do things over again? And I think that would be fascinating, like, what would happen if it was true? Like, what would happen if, like, tomorrow morning we wake up and the news says, you know what, the scientists and MIT have actually cracked time travel. And we know how to do it, and, anybody can go back in time, wherever. Like, what would people actually want to do? Some of your friends gave you some answers. About 20 years ago, there was this magazine, like a very small magazine in Portland, Oregon. It was called something like Backwoods Home Magazine. And it was this kind of like silly magazine about, survivalists. So, if the zombie apocalypse happened, how to can your own food and how to survive like in a tent for like, 2 weeks or whatever until the zombies die or not. And it was like a legit magazine that was printed out and distributed. And in this magazine, they ran a classified. And I really do not mean to sound condescending, but when I was working on this sermon, I was thinking for a second, I hope they know what a classified is. So just in case you don't, okay, like Craigslist, those used to show up in newspapers back in the day. And like that's how you say, hey, I have a couch, and does anybody want to take my couch? Or, I'm looking for a job or whatever. Like people would post these classifieds. And this particular classified read like this. I'm going to read it to you. And I think we have a picture of it. Wanted. Somebody to go back in time with me. This is not a joke. P.O. Box 322, Oakview, California, 93022. You'll get paid after we get back. Must bring your own weapons. Safety not guaranteed. I have only done this once before. And that, my friends, is the greatest classified ad of all time. Okay, that's amazing. Now, this is a story of that ad, believe it or not. what happened is that the guy that was printing the magazine ran out of content when he was making the magazine. He had like half a page blank. So what he did was that he just started coming up with fake classified ads to fill up the space. So he made one that he was looking for a girlfriend and whatnot, and he made one about time travel, as you do. Okay? Now, the interesting thing that happened is that he made two mistakes. The first mistake that he made was that he didn't realize that at this period in time, the internet was starting to become popular. And somebody saw this classified ad, thought it was funny, and posted it on the internet. The second mistake he made was that he used a legitimate P.O. box address. He lived in Portland, but he used to live in California, and he had that P.O. box. And I guess, when you're making up a fake classified ad about time travel, it's too much work to make up a P.O. box, so you put a real one, right? But the crazy thing is that he started getting letters to it. And some of the letters were like people in on the joke, like, hey, I forgot my time machine in 1985, and I need help to get back and find my DeLorean, can you help me, right? Some of the letters were of a different nature. It was like a guy saying, hey, we got arrested doing a bank heist, and we are doing time in jail right now, but if you can get us back like 5 minutes before we get arrested, like we have our own weapons, we'll give you part of the loot, it'll be awesome, can you hook us up? But then he would also get a different type of letter. He got letters, for example, from a woman that was having an affair and accidentally killed her husband and was doing a life sentence in prison and wanted to know if he could take her back in time so she wouldn't kill her husband. He would get letters from mothers of children that had taken their lives, begging him to go back in time and talk their kids out of committing suicide. And years later, when he's interviewed about this, he says, those letters were so heartbreaking, I almost couldn't read them. And I felt a certain amount of shame for not anticipating the false hope I placed in so many hearts. Isn't that funny? Because, you and I know that time travel isn't real. But I wonder if we carried with ourselves the regret or the pain or the shame of the people that wrote those letters, if we wouldn't be tempted to believe that there was a time machine that could take us back and fix what we did wrong. I think it's fascinating because if we're honest, probably a lot of us, more than we care to admit, walk around with that type of regret and shame of things that we've done, of words that we've said that we wish we could take back, of relationships that we've let fizzle that we wish we could take back, of habits and things that we've tangled ourselves with that we wish we could get rid of. And I think the perfect example of this is actually Peter. You guys have been taking a look at the life of Peter, and even today you guys looked at this scene in the life of Peter where Peter wishes that he could have a time machine and go back and fix his mistake, Peter is always like putting his foot in his mouth and always like, speaking more than he should and getting ahead of himself. And, today we find him in this moment where he denies his best friend and his master and his leader. And I'll bet you any money that if we could talk to Peter and we said, Peter, there's a time machine and you can go back, he would say, please take me back so I can take that back. Let me read you the scene where this happens. This is in the Gospel of Luke in chapter 22, and I'm going to start reading on verse 54. This is what it says. It says, then Seizing him, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. They're talking about Jesus at this point. Jesus is being arrested. Peter followed at a distance. And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I do not know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted that certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean. Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. You see, it's not only that Peter denies and abandons Jesus and is ashamed of being associated with Jesus and is afraid of being associated with Jesus at the very worst possible moment. It's that hours before, Peter was like getting offended that Jesus would even insinuate that he would do that. Like if you read that scene in the book of Matthew when Jesus is like, you're all going to abandon me for a little bit, but I'm praying that God is going to, bring you back after that. And when I return, I want you to meet me in Galilee. And Peter is the first one to jump up and down and say, no. They're going to abandon you. I'm going to stay with you. Right? Peter replied, this is Matthew 26, verse 33. Peter replied, even if all fall away on account of you, I never will. Truly, I tell you, Jesus answered, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the other disciples said the same. And now we find Peter disowning Jesus, staring at his master as he's being carried away to be tortured, realizing what he's done and just going outside and just weeping bitterly because of what happened. But then again, I don't think that this is only the story of Peter. If you think about it, this is the story of humanity as a whole. Like if you read the whole Bible, the way the story of humanity starts is God creates the world and creates humanity so that he could show us his love and love us so that we could love him back and live in perfect harmony and joyful relationship with him. And since the very beginning, we decide to walk away and do our own thing. And ever since that, we've been suffering the consequences of walking away from God. The Apostle Paul in the book of Romans, he would say it this way. This is Romans 5, verse 12. He says, therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sin. What Paul is saying here is, you could actually trace all of the suffering in the world, all of the pain, all of the brokenness, all of the tragedies, all of the mistakes your parents have made, all of the mistakes you've made. You can trace it all back to this one moment. So if you have a time machine and you want to take care of things, that's where you should go, right? And I remember, I grew up in church, so I would hear, on Sunday school, the story about Adam and Eve and the fruit and whatnot. And I remember thinking, man, somebody used this to invent a time machine and tackle Eve, I had it all planned out in my head. I would get in my DeLorean and it's Back to the Future 2, so it flies at this point. And my DeLorean would kind of land in the Garden of Eden. And I would time it so just Eve is about to eat the fruit. So she's and I'm just running behind her no. And I would just tackle her to the ground, and the fruit falls away, and I save the world, right? Wouldn't that be awesome? I remember thinking like that. As I got older, I realized something. Even if we were able to invent a time machine and tackle Eve right before she's about to eat the fruit and you kind of like save the situation, I think that humanity would have eventually sinned. Maybe it wouldn't have been Adam and Eve, maybe it would have been Cain or Abel or their kids. Eventually, we would have walked away from God. Just like Peter. And I wonder if sometimes we find ourselves in that moment, just like Peter is, right after he's denied Jesus and remember what Jesus had told him, and he's like outside weeping bitterly. I wonder if sometimes we found ourselves in those moments. When we know that we've said the wrong thing and the person in front of us is just like fighting tears because of the pain that we've caused. When we realize the betrayal, when we've realized the damage, when we've realized that we are addicted to this thing and we can't get out of it by ourselves. And I wonder if we're like Peter, just like, how did I get myself here? And what if I could start over and change this? Which takes us to today's passage. So what I want to do is I want to read to you from the Gospel of John a couple of snippets about the scene of Jesus' arrest, crucifixion, and death. So this is John chapter 19. I'm going to start reading on verse 1, and you can follow along on the screen. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." And they slapped him in the face. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." And the next few verses is basically Pilate going back and forth with the religious authorities at the time. And then we get to verse 16. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross. He went out of the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. And then a few verses later, after he's been crucified and he's been very slowly bleeding to death, in verse 28 he says, "Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, 'I am thirsty.' A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, 'It is finished.' With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit." And like some Bible scholars will tell you that you can infer by the passage that Peter was around. And I wonder if Peter, after having basically betrayed his closest friend, and knowing that he knew that he had done that, if Peter is just looking at Jesus dying, and he has this pain, not only because his best friend and his master is dying unfairly, mind you, but he has this pain and this regret because he doesn't have a chance to say, "I'm sorry." He doesn't have a chance to say, I'm sorry for what I did. Would you please forgive me? He thinks that this is it. And then he's going to have to live the rest of his life with the shame and the guilt and the pain of what he did. And I wonder if Peter is asking himself, why did Jesus have to die? And we kind of know because like we've been to church and people have told us the story and everything, but I wonder if even with whatever knowledge Peter had at the time, he's like, why? And I think that the best answer to that is that Jesus had to die precisely so that Peter could have another chance. And Jesus had to die so that you and me could have another chance. Because you see, the crucifixion of Jesus is God's answer to the problem of humanity. The problem that we are so entangled by sin that we keep finding ourselves in these situations over and over and over again where we wish we had a time machine to undo our mistakes. And it's a question, how do you fix that problem? How do you fix humanity? How do you give humanity a second chance? You see, this is the thing. I don't think that the story of Peter is just a story of, that knucklehead disciple of Jesus that messed up and, talked more than he should. I think that the story of Peter is my story. And I would venture to say that it's your story. You may say, well, I've never told Jesus I wasn't going to deny him and then gone right out when he's getting arrested and denied him, but we have. Especially in situations like this, we're at these camps and we're like so, the emotion and the music and the sound and like the spirit is so great and we're like, God, like I'm going to live for you from now on and this is it, like I'm going to dedicate my life to you and we walk out these doors and, we fall back into the same things. We say we're going to change. We say we're going to do that thing again. We say we're going to treat this person better. We say we're going to forgive. And then we just find ourselves almost in like this vicious cycle of pain and shame and guilt. And that's not only our story. That's the story of the world. Left to its own devices, this is where humanity ends, in death. Look at your Facebook feed. Okay? And besides like the regular drama or people complaining about whatever, we see, look at the news, we see outside, and we see this pain and this death, and we see hate, and we see resentment, and we see bitterness, and we see, quite frankly, evil around us. That's where sin leads us. The Apostle Paul in Romans 3:23 would say, for the wages of sin is death. So how do you fix it, right? Because you could, let's hit the reset button, okay? Let's wipe everybody out and bring new people that are better, that haven't messed up, right? But then, if you read the story of Noah, and God's done that already, and, not 2 minutes after Noah gets drunk and naked and makes a whole mess of things again. Because the problem is not for us to stop doing the thing that we did. The problem is sometimes what's inside. And you see, that's why the time machine fantasy doesn't work. Because the time machine fantasy is, if I could only stop from doing that thing. But what God says is, you don't need to stop doing the thing and you don't need to stop yourself from messing up. You need to change your heart. You need to be changed inside. In the words that Jesus would use is that you need to be born again. And one of the promises of the Messiah in the Old Testament, that the thing that Jesus was going to do in the world was that he was actually going to give people a new heart. In the book of Ezekiel, chapter 36, verse 26 says, "And I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and be careful to obey my rules." The problem lies ultimately in our hearts. We don't need to just stop and, talk ourselves out of doing whatever the thing it is that we did. We need to be changed from the inside out. And this is the thing. According to the writers of the scriptures, the way that this happens is through Jesus. Jesus comes into the world and he does two things. He lives the life that we should have lived. He lives the perfect life. He gets it right. He always treats people with compassion. He always treats people with kindness. He always forgives. He is not selfish. He is not greedy. He gets it right. Whatever the perfect version of your life without making mistakes, that's the life that Jesus lives. Well, Peter is denying Jesus. Jesus is saying, "Father, forgive them because they don't know what they do." So Jesus lives the life we should have lived. But he has another thing. He then also dies the death we should have died. And that might sound harsh and that might sound difficult to hear, but the reality of things is that left to our own devices, we end up in death. And that shame, that guilt that we carry when we sin, when we betray, when we do things, that's that. That's like something inside of us that knows spiritually where things lead. And the good news is that Jesus takes that upon himself. So Jesus dies because there's no time machine. Because we can't go back and fix the thing. But we can start over. We can be born again. That's the gospel. That's what Jesus is doing. And you know what's funny? Whenever I read this and hear it, my first thought is almost, who does that? Like what kind of God sends his own son into the world to clean up somebody else's mess? A few months ago, I was, walking on the street in my city, and somebody handed me like a brochure that was kind of like from a different religion. And the point that the brochure was trying to make is kind of like, we're cool with Jesus, like we like Jesus, but we don't worship Jesus like where people worship Jesus. And the argument that brochure was making is actually this. It says, you know why we don't worship Jesus? Because no self-respecting God would have become a human being. Like Jesus can't be God. Because if he was God, he would have never become a person. Who does that? And the answer is, a God who loves his creation so much that's willing to step into their place because there's no time machine. And because we've made such a mess of things that we need somebody to help us start over again. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21, Paul says, "For our sake, he made him sin. He made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." So what? Well, this is the thing. Whenever I read this story, whenever I hear this story, and if I put myself on the place of Peter, the one thing that just like stirs up within me is, wow, so much love. And you know what? Anybody that's ever become a Christian Since the time of Jesus, anybody that decided to follow Jesus, they haven't really decided to follow him because somebody argued them into Christianity or because somebody kind of like presented the evidence and showed them Christianity like made more sense than another religion. The only reason why anybody becomes a Christian is because they've come face to face with that love. And the only thing I want to present to you guys tonight is that. Later on, the Apostle John says that we love because he loved us first. So Peter is there looking at his master die. And later on, when Jesus resurrects and comes back, he gets it that it was done for love. Which means one thing. Maybe you're here tonight. And you may be carrying within you regret and sin and guilt because of who knows why. And whether you've decided to follow Jesus or whether you've never decided to follow Jesus before, that love is available to you. You can start over. You know how I know that? Because of something that Jesus says when he's on the cross. There's this line in John chapter 19 where Jesus is about to die, and he says, "It is finished." And that actually, believe it or not, is it's an economic term. Like in the times, it's a Greek term that meant like whenever you had a debt, you would pay installments. You know, kind of like every month you pay a little bit. And when you got to the last payment that you had to make, which meant that you finally owned the thing for yourself, whether it was, cattle or whatever, when the last coin was given to the person that you owed it, the person would say, "It is finished. The debt is paid." And that would be such a liberating experience for the person that knew that he wasn't in any other danger of having his possessions taken or being thrown into jail because he didn't owe anything. A couple years ago, a magazine called GQ ran an article on Hillsong, the church that has all the worship songs. They have a church in New York. And this writer for the article basically was like with him for like a couple months, just like shouting him around. And this was a time at which actually, remember when Justin Bieber went crazy? And like there was this petition going around that we wanted to like deport him to Canada because we didn't want him anymore and whatever. Do you just remember that time? So during that time, there's a moment where like Justin Bieber goes silent and nobody knows where he is. He's not tweeting, he's not posting anything on Instagram. And it turns out that he moved in with the pastor of Hillsong in New York for a couple months, almost like rehab, he can crush my couch if he wants, like if next time he's feeling like that. But anyway, so for a couple months, Justin Bieber is just living with these pastors, hanging out. And then one night, 2 a.m, he just decides that he needs to get baptized. And he's like, I need to get baptized right now. You need to find a place to baptize me. Can you please baptize me now? But obviously, when you're Justin Bieber, it's not as easy because there's paparazzi following you everywhere. So the article reads that like they go to like the pool at this apartment building and then all the paparazzi are outside so they can't get in, and like a couple times again like they can't, find a place. And eventually, because it's Hillsong and it's New York, the pastor is best friends with a Knicks basketball player at the time, Tyson Chandler. And Tyson Chandler is like this giant basketball player that has this fancy apartment in New York, and he had a bathtub made to spec for him, So it's like this giant bathtub, and Justin Bieber is this flimsy human being that fits wherever. So he can actually go into the tub with no problem, right? So they end up getting into Tyson Chandler's apartment, and he ends up baptizing Justin Bieber in this tub. And this is what the writer of the article says right after that. And mind you, this is not a Christian that's writing this. And that is an image that will stick with you, let me tell you. Justin Bieber on his knees in Tyson Chandler's bathtub, wet. and sobbing against Pastor Carl's chest. So unable to cope with being himself that he has to be born anew. He has to be declared someone entirely different in order to make it through the night. It is finished. And I wonder if they're around Peter and Jesus had a conversation. And Peter is like, but Jesus, you know what I did. Like, I denied you. I pretended I didn't know you got offended. And Jesus looks at Peter and Jesus is like, it is finished. And you may be here in this room tonight and you may be thinking, yes, Joel, but you don't know what I've done. It is finished. Yes, Joel. You think you know what you do. You think it's like something like, light and like every other kid does the same thing. But you have no idea, okay? You have no idea what's happened to me. You have no idea what's been done to me. You have no idea the thoughts that I had at night, the pain that I carry, the things that I've done, the way I look at myself in the mirror every night. You don't understand. And yes, I don't, but the words remain the same for you. It is finished. This is a declaration of Jesus not only to the people there, this is a declaration of Jesus to the universe. It is finished. You see, it's not that what you've done or that what's been done to you doesn't matter. It's that what he's done and what's been done to him matters more. It is finished. That's your time machine. That no matter what we've done, no matter the amount of pain and sorrow and guilt and shame and regret that we carry with us, it's been taken up in Jesus. And Jesus looks at us and just says, it is finished. There's one thing I want to invite you guys to do tonight. Because part of the problem is that as human beings, we need to do things to learn better than just hearing them. By the way, that's why we have communion every Sunday at church. Because somebody needs to look at you in the eye and hand you a piece of bread and say, Jesus' body was broken for you. And somebody has to hold a cup and look at you in the eye and remind you that, yes, you with your pain and with your sin and with your guilt and with whatever it is that you've done, whatever it is that you're going to do again, Jesus' blood was shed for you. So I want to give you an opportunity to kind of like enter into this moment. So I don't know if you're here and you're not even sure where you're at with the whole Jesus thing. Like your parents sent you here or your buddy invited you. The girl that you had a crush on was coming, so you came. Like, I don't know how you ended up here tonight. But if you're alive, if there's pulse in your veins, this word is for you. It is finished. And tonight, Jesus makes you an invitation to step into that life, to receive that sacrifice, and to be born again. And we wanted to figure out a way of symbolizing it. And, there's this clean white canvas in here. And Jesus going to the cross and sacrificing for us is him taking our sin and our shame upon himself. and being stained by it. And He's stained by it so that our lives can be clean. So we want to give you an opportunity to actually do that tonight. So if you feel led, if you feel like you could use a start over, if you feel like you could use forgiveness, if you feel like you could use being born again today, we want to invite you to come down the center aisle and, pick up one of these bottles and just spray it once over the canvas. And as you do it, just maybe whisper it to yourself. It is finished. Peter goes on to be a champion for Christianity, to be a kingdom worker. You know why? Because it is finished. And you have amazing futures ahead of yourselves. And God is going to do incredible things for your lives. You know why? Because it is finished. Why don't you pray with me? Father, we're here before you with things that we carry with us, with regrets and with guilt and with shame and pain and these wishes that we could just get a different life. And we look at your Son offering us that different life, offering us His perfect life. So Lord, may we be able to receive that and step on that and experience the love and the freedom and the forgiveness that's only found in you. In the name of Jesus, I pray. So when you're ready, as the band's playing, you step down the center aisle, and then once you pray, just go out the outer side of the place.